Hi there friends, and hi Dad. Today we are working on a 2006 Toyota Tundra. We're going to do the ball joints, the CVs, check the brakes, check a couple of other things like the control arm bushings and the sway bar end link bushings. We'll go from there. I'm just going to spin around and we're going to talk about the parts and a couple of things specific to this truck. Okay, starting with the CVs themselves, you will see from the picture that these are, of course, directional. They have the ABS gear on one side, and then of course the hub side. These are GSP. These are right there, part number NCV 69158XDP. I got these from Yoda Shop. And then for the ball joints, the upper ball joints, let's start with those. These are non-directional, so the same one as for the right and left side. That would be 43310, 39016. So you're going to need two of those. For the lower ball joints, they are directional. It's because of the shape of the bracket. And then for an 06 Tundra, that would be 43340, 39595. The other side would be 43330, 39825. So those are your right and left side. And then because these CVs do not bolt on, they are the snap ring pop in, pop out style, you do need the oil seals. I'm not sure if you actually do need them depending on the condition of your oil seal, but we're going to go ahead and replace them anyways. For the right and left side, they are different. So 90311 47013 and 90311 47027. So that is everything that we have parts wise for this particular job. There are a couple of things that we're going to do before we even start, and I will show you those once I unpackage these upper ball joints. Okay, so taking a look at the ball joint itself, it is this circular joint. It has grease down in the knuckle, and then you get the snap ring to keep it onto the hub. This is the binder that keeps the boot on. Of course, you have the boot, and then you get the castle nut and cotter pin. So the way that this works is they give you a little diagram. Of course, this is the top of the hub. So the ball joint goes up through it, you put the snap ring on it, then you put the boot over the top of everything. That is, of course, what it looks like when it's done. Now, these are a very, very tight fit. The best thing that you can do for this is put it in the freezer. So, luckily for me, I have a freezer. We're gonna put both of these in here and leave them just like that until we are ready to get those on, because they are an extremely tight fit, and I don't know if I can show you. Yeah, it's going to be right there. Right there is the boot for the upper ball joint. So we're going to go ahead and make sure we get those nice and cold. Metal contracts, and that is how we are going to do both of the upper ball joints. The lowers, we shouldn't have to worry about that because they have bolt holes. The lowers bolt on. The upper is, of course, a press fit. So you will want a ball joint press for this job 100%. So I also said we were going to talk about stuff specific to this Tundra, and that would be these lower ball joints. Now, I called around and tried to find ball joints specific to this truck, and they're actually kind of hard to find, and that's because of this kind of shroud looking thing here. Now, this is also made of rubber, and they only made this specific ball joint from November of 2005 until December of 2006 on those trucks. They were equipped with this ball joint. So I'm assuming, please do your research, but I'm assuming that would be the same on all of the Tundras and all of the Sequoias that were made during that time period. Now, you have the part number for this. This will not work on the 00 to 04 Tundras as far as I know. This is a different ball joint. They are not the same. I don't know if the spacing on the bolts is different, but the overall shape is very aggressive, more aggressive than I remember, especially in the part that connects to the steering knuckle. And I am certain that this is not the standard ball joint for all of the all of the Tundras and Sequoias. This is for the end of 05 and 06s. So keep that in mind when you're doing this research, that there are two different ball joints out there depending on which years you have of the Tundra or Sequoia. As always, pick a rear tire and block it off on both sides. All right, taking a look at the front and the way that I have the support set up. There's one under the frame, and there are two under the cross member there. Taking a look at the hub assembly, the rotor looks fine. I don't feel any nasty warping or anything. There's a bit of a lip on it, but the brake pads, if you look, still have plenty of life left on them. Taking a look at the upper ball joint here, this is where it gets pressed in. This is the bottom of the ball joint, then this is the hub. Taking a look at some of the grommets here, those are looking a little worse for wear. That is on the sway bar end link. I don't feel, it's not loose though. Nowhere in here. It might be dry, but it's not loose. This is of course your brake line that goes to the caliper. Then this is the line that goes to the ABS sensor. This is of course the ABS side. And then up in there you can see where it goes into the diff. The coilover, which we will have to unbolt at the bottom to get the hub off. And then if I go all the way around there, whoa, sorry, camera turning. There is that lower ball joint right here, right there, and the bolts that go to it with the little shroud thing that we were talking about earlier. So we are fully supported. I'm going to start by getting the caliper off and the rotor, and then we will go from there. Here's a pro tip for when you're getting your caliper off. First off, that's a 17 millimeter, and there are 2 bolts. There's one, there's another one below it. But what you're going to want to do is, there's a 12 mil that holds right there in that hole, that holds this bracket on, and that bracket connects the brake line and the ABS sensor. Now if you look down in there, you can see the ABS gear, and so what you're going to want to do is take those 2 bolts out. One's a 12, one's a 10, and then when you get the bolts out of your caliper, you can just hang it up on a bungee that you already have set up. You do not have to worry about breaking anything. Everything will be nice and out of the way. That's a pro tip. Okay, in order to give myself some more space, there's another bracket with another 10 millimeter right here that I took off. And then I've ratchet strapped the caliper up out of the way and bungeed off the bracket to keep everything out of the way with the sensor and whatnot from the hub. So that is the current setup that I am using. Now I'm going to get this rotor off, which has not been off in a long time, so wish me luck. Okay, here's another pro tip. Put a couple of lugs on there, get yourself a mallet, rubber, and hit right there where the shroud, right there where the shroud is open, comes right off. Put your back into it, sacrifice a glove. Just got in there with a super light duty sanding wheel and just took off the little bit of rust that was holding it onto that hub. The hub itself looks pretty good. I'll clean in there with a wire brush, but I'm not seeing anything that is binding or anything that is going to cause problems in the future. I'm not seeing enough rust to be worried. The rest of the sway bar stuff looks good. This is another bushing for it. So yeah, we're just going to get started on pulling the rest of this apart. Okay, so I cleaned up the upper ball joint nut and pulled the cotter pin off and got the nut unbolted. On the bottom, you can see that I've got some distance now between the hub assembly and the lower ball joint. Think about the geometry of how this front suspension is set up. This upper control arm is on its own bushings. You have a plate mounted to the body, isolated from the to the frame, isolated from the upper control arm that has the strut in it, and the strut is putting pressure down on the lower control arm. So in doing so, I can free up, see that? I can free the hub from the lower ball joint. Now all I need to do is knock this off, pop this dust cap off, get the bolt off of the end of the CV there, and this hub will come clean off. Okay, there is the dust cap, cotter pin, lock nut, and nut. And then this is the end of the CV protruding, and you can see that it is free. See, I can move it on the hub, and then you can see that it is freed up back there. And then I will just knock that off, and this whole hub assembly will come on out. Beautiful. I swear that only took like one tap with a hammer and it just popped right out. So here's the end of the CV. The other end is like lock ringed up in the diff. So what we're going to do is knock the lower ball joint off, try to save the outer tie rod. So I'll be really careful getting this cotter pin and lock nut, castle nut off enough so that I can save the threads here, and then load up the new lower, load up the CV, and slap this thing back together. Really not that bad. Let's take a look at the inside of the hub area where the wheel bearing is. Pretty clean. Not seeing any signs of damage. Everything rotates super smoothly with no binding. I'll show you here if I just give it a little tap. See that? It's Look at that. Ooh, nice and clean. 2006, the thing's like 18 years old. So anyways, this is that upper that I was talking about. There's a lock ring right there, so we'll get that off, knock this out. And then I unfortunately don't think the other ones have been in the freezer long enough, so we might have to put this on hold until those are much colder. So this is the ball joint press that I'm using. It is an OMT. And all that I've done so far on this upper is just get the boot and the snap ring off. You can see the snap ring down there. And don't feel like you have to use a ball joint press to get them out. You can use a sledge and a couple of hits will do it just fine. I need to use the ball joint press to get the new one in. So I figured I would just break it out and do a quick little time lapse of pressing this one out. So as you just saw, we zipped out that front ball joint. You can see the mirrored surface there showing just how tight it was inside of that hub. And then if I show you, spin the camera, there is that opening. So I'm just going to clean up this surface here, make sure that there are nothing abrasive, nothing that could jam up that new one going in. And that new one has been overnight in the freezer, keeping it nice and constricted. So hopefully they should zip in pretty easy. Well, I'm super close to getting it all the way seated. I don't know if you can tell, but there's only about 2 to 3 millimeters of distance left to get this new ball joint in. But my ball joint press plus this particular impact is not actually enough to seat the rest of this thing, even though I had it in the freezer overnight. So I'm going to run over to a local shop and have them finish pressing it. On this side, I did knock the outer tie rod off the lower ball joint and pop the lower ball joint out of the lower control arm. So I'll clean this up a little bit, slap the new ball joint in, and then we will get this old CV out, put the new CV in, and then we're done on this side. Slap it back together and good to go. All right, forgive the wind and road noise, but I just got that thing seated all the way down. You can see that this groove right here where my nail is, that is for the snap ring. So now that it is seated all the way up against the top of the hub, I can get the snap ring on there, and then we can put the boot on and call it good. I'm gonna clean up this area and give it a little more grease, and then we can slap this thing back on the lower ball joint and up into the truck. Taking a look now at the factory CV, you can see this is the hub side where the lock nut goes. And then on this side, it has this, kind of hard to show you, but it's a little, there, you can see that this is kind of like a little snap ring, and it has a gap in it right there, and it has pressure on it. So you just pop, I just put a pry bar on this edge right here and tapped and popped this one out. And then I have popped the new one in. Now notably, you can see right there, the new one is tapered. It is much, much thicker and stronger on this side than the previous one. And if you hold your breath, don't throw up. I'm gonna go under the car. I know this is jarring for some people. We had the catch can down there, and that is what it looks like up underneath. So that little drip was just from installation. I have not noticed any drips since, but yeah, there you go. New CV is installed. Okay, here's a good look at the back of the hub again. This, of course, is the lower ball joint. I have not torqued these down. They are just in there to hold it in place. Up here is where the end of the tie rod will go through. And then these are, of course, for the brake caliper. Your wheel bearing is all inside there still, nice and sealed. That's just a little bit of dust, don't worry about it. And then the upper ball joint, of course, on seated. And then the splines for the CV will go right into those splines right there in the hub. So what I've done is just get this set up so that I can drop this lower one in, just set it right in there, and then pivot the upper one in, bring this control arm down a little bit and bring this one up, and then tighten it all together, pop the steering on, pop the rest of it back together, and then I'm done. So all that I've done is slide the end through, matching the splines up, and drop the lower ball joint knuckle into that hole there. You can see I don't have anything else bolted up here, and I don't have anything in there, but now it's not gonna go anywhere. I can put a nut on that lower ball joint to hold it in place, and then you can see I can snug that up, get this up into that hole, and then we are done. So this is not a hard job to do, especially if you know the order of operations. So just take your time and go through it, and I'll check in a couple. For once in my adult life, I found a super helpful thing on a forum, so I'm gonna go ahead and throw that up now. These are all the measurements for the lower ball joint and the outer tie rod, which I'm showing you right now. That would be that castle nut and those 4 bolts that hold that lower ball joint to the actual hub. I have gone ahead and torqued the upper to 80 per the factory service manual, and then we're just gonna get started on getting the nut and lock nut on this CV. Now I've gone ahead, it's kind of hard to show you with the light, but if you look up in there, I can rotate this with ease. I mean, no grinding or binding, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it up in there, but there are no leaks. So far so good, we're almost done. Okay, this is the setup for the hub. You can see that I have the nut in the socket there. 173 foot-pounds is the torque spec. Now, I've already torqued it, but I'm just gonna show you how I did it. I'm very scared of this because of the pressure that I have to put on it, so I'm just stepping on it very, very, very softly, and you should be able to hear the click. There you go. Now you know that we're in spec. All right, there's the finished product. Forgive the fingerprints that you see. I'm gonna do a little cleanup before I slap the wheel back on, but there you go. Upper ball joint, tie rod end, all seated, new CV, way beefier than factory, and lower ball joint all seated. So everything went together nice and smooth. This is not a hard project. You just need the right tools. Even if you break some, you can still finish. Anyways, the last part, of course, is to put the wheel and tire back on. And then because I did mess with the tie rods, I do recommend if you do this job, you should go get an alignment. It's always good practice when you take your front end apart to go get an alignment. So slap the wheel and tire back on and we'll be done. And there you have it, all done on that side. Rinse and repeat for the driver's side. Of course, check your part numbers before you start this job. But there you go, that was ball joints and CVs for an 05-06 Tundra Sequoia. Thanks for watching, peace out.